15 to 20 lives were lost in a military operation last Sunday in Jakiri, in Cameroon's Bui division, and the most urgent question now is whether this was a massacre or a legitimate military action. Liam, why has this single event sparked such intense and divided public discussion?
Alice, the core of the debate comes down to the possibility of civilian deaths. Those who label it a massacre point to this directly. If even some of those killed were unarmed civilians, not actively involved in hostilities, it fundamentally changes the nature of the operation. Under both moral principles and international law, killing civilians in large numbers, especially when they can't defend themselves, or through indiscriminate force, can indeed be considered a massacre.
So it's the potential presence of non-combatants that's crucial. But what about the circumstances of the operation itself? Does that factor into the massacre argument?
It absolutely does. The operation took place pre-dawn. At that hour, distinguishing between armed fighters and ordinary civilians becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, in a chaotic situation. History has shown us that when force is used without precision or clear accountability, innocent lives are often the first to be lost. So, for many, if civilians were among the dead, either intentionally or through negligence, then calling it a massacre isn't an exaggeration. It's a call for accountability.
I understand that perspective. But on the other side, authorities maintain this was a legitimate operation, targeting suspected separatist fighters. How do those who argue it was not a massacre frame their position?
They ground their argument in the harsh realities of armed conflict. If the authorities are correct that they were targeting suspected separatist fighters, then it was a legitimate military raid. In conflict zones, armed groups often operate within civilian areas, which makes engagements incredibly complex and dangerous. This significantly increases the risk of casualties, even in operations that are supposedly well targeted.
So, the presence of armed individuals within a civilian setting complicates everything. Does that mean civilian casualties are an unavoidable tragic consequence rather than evidence of a massacre?
Precisely. The argument is that the presence of fighters transforms the situation into a combat scenario, not an attack specifically aimed at defenseless civilians. Even if civilian casualties did occur, the key question becomes one of intent. Were civilians deliberately targeted, or were they unintended victims of what was considered a lawful operation against combatants? Without clear evidence of intentional or indiscriminate killing, some argue that using the term massacre is premature and could be misleading. They assert that a military operation against armed separatists, even one with a tragic loss of life, doesn't automatically qualify as a massacre.
This really highlights the tension between intent and outcome. It seems both sides of this argument hinge on crucial facts that we simply don't have yet. Where does this leave us in trying to understand what happened in Jakiri?
It leaves us not with certainty, but with a profound responsibility to seek it out. Both arguments, the one claiming massacre and the one refuting it, ultimately depend on facts that have not been fully established. We need to know who the victims were exactly, what precisely occurred during that operation, and if civilians were present, how they were impacted. Until these questions are answered through a credible and independent investigation, calling it a massacre may be too soon, but dismissing the concern entirely would be too dangerous.
So the debate isn't just about a single word, but about establishing the truth and demanding accountability for multiple lives lost. It's about how a society values human life in times of conflict.
Absolutely. The burden is not on the public to remain silent. It is on those in power to provide clarity. Instead of rushing to label the event, we should demand evidence, transparency, and accountability. A nation is not weakened by these kinds of questions. It is weakened when those questions are ignored.
If you found this conversation insightful, please consider sharing it with someone else.